Joespeak podcast. Once again, I always say I have a good one. I think I'm always right, but I'm right for different reasons. It's great to be multifaceted here. And today I've got a friend who you have seen. Maybe you've seen him on NewsNation. Maybe you've seen him on Law and Crime. Maybe you've seen him in many of the shows that he's done, or heard his voice on radio, seen him in New York local television. A trained actor, a lawyer. We'll have to talk about what they have in common a bit, and an anchor and reporter, and all around really good guy. The newly married Jesse Weber. Jesse, good to see you.
Joe, thanks so much for having me. It's funny when you were mentioning my resume.
Right.
I can't forget that one of the things that I do is I fill in on Sirius XM.
Right.
I was taking calls from different listeners, and I got a call from this guy, Joe, out in New York. And it was you, and I had no idea it was you. And you're like, it's Joe from Long Crime. I was like laughing about it. I'm so happy you called in, and we had to go back and forth. But
that's pretty neat.
That was great. Joe, good to be on with you. Thanks so much for having me here on the show.
Yeah, well, my first thing is a heartfelt thanks. I tell you, I started, I always wanted to do television, and started doing Law and Crime once Rachel over there, so I had sent her an article. I said, you guys still taking articles? And I'd written something about the Supreme Court. And she says, hey, by the way, if you ever want to do television, I'm like, me. And started doing that. And I think my first show I was with Brian, but what was neat is that I often, because I have this full-time law practice, do early in the morning. And that put me at a morning docket with Jesse Weber. So I want to thank you for really kind of helping me find my legs in commentary and legal commentary and legal analysis. I mean, those are, some of my best memories of doing this stuff the last few years. So.
You were natural. You don't need me to thank you. If you do a great job, that's it. And I thought you were fascinating. You had a great grasp of the issues, and I really wanted to hear more from you. So you're the only one you have to thank.
Right. Well, thank you, my friend. I appreciate you. Thank you anyway. So, the things we'll go to get a compliment. But in any event, so I love building the house. I love talking about kind of what got you here, what gets our guests to kind of where they are. So you have a fascinating background of your own, not only as a lawyer, you always knew that you wanted to be a lawyer, a trained actor, and some of the things that you have done to getting you to this place. So talk to us a little bit about how Jesse Weber became Jesse Weber.
Oh boy. I mean, I first wanted to be a Ghostbuster. When I realized that didn't work out, then I tried to be a secret agent. I was like, no, I gotta really figure out what I want to do with my life. No, I didn't know I always wanted to be a lawyer. I went to the University of Michigan undergrad. My brother went there. At one point, I thought I would get into business. My father was an executive in the fashion apparel industry. And I took some classes on business. But what I really was interested in, it was funny, I was interested in politics and law. And my brother's an attorney, and he said, you should go to law school. My dad encouraged it. You should definitely go to law school. Even if you don't practice, you'll definitely get a great education. You'll learn. So I went to law school, went to New York Law School. And as I was there, I went in with the mindset, I'm not going to be a lawyer. I'll just learn whatever it is I want to learn. And as I was studying the law, I loved it. I loved it from day one. And not to toot my own horn, I was actually very good at it. I was doing very well in school. And I said, you know what? I think I should practice law. Let me see what it's like. I know everybody hates it. Everybody goes, you're going to hate it. You're going to hate it. You're going to hate it. I was like, you don't know me. I'm different. So I started practicing law, and I hated it. The truth is, though, I really did learn a lot in the several years that I practiced. And I did big corporate law. I did litigation. I did intellectual property. It was an incredible learning experience. And I worked with terrific people, some of whom I still talk to today. Just the practice of law really wasn't for me. And I think what told me what I wanted to do, and I guess who I was supposed to be, out of all things, it was my brother's wedding about 10 years ago. I gave the best man speech in front of a whole crowded room, and not gonna lie, did very well with the speech. So much so that afterwards, people came up to me like, you have to be Ryan Seacrest, you have to be a host, you have to be an anchor. And it was funny because I had done a little bit of that in college for different projects. I had done like man on the street interviews. And I realized one of the things I always liked to do, particularly in the law, was presenting. It wasn't so much the, writing the briefs or the research. It was, the thing I enjoyed the most was presenting, whether it was to clients or things like that. So I said, maybe I can figure out a way to present. And at the time, I thought, maybe I should be an actor. Maybe that's my calling. I've never done it before. Maybe I'll be interested in it. Who knows? So I took the very bold step, and I don't recommend anybody doing this. I saved up a lot of money from working as a lawyer, and I left my law firm and became a actor. I literally went to acting school. I went to the Lee Strasberg Theater and Film Institute, where Al Pacino, Robert De Niro, Chris Evans, Scarlett Johansson, they all went there. And I studied to become an actor. And I learned something about myself very early on. Not an actor, not an actor. It's tough, let me tell you. I enjoyed it, but one of the things that I learned was just how to be comfortable on camera. And I realized the thing that I'm most comfortable with is being myself and how to present. So I started realizing maybe I wanted to be an anchor and a host. And I started doing these things. I did commercials, I did short films. One of the acting things I did was I was in Russell Crowe's show on Showtime called The Loudest Voice. I was in the premiere episode with him. I acted alongside him. I played a reporter, and we went back and forth. But acting, while it's great, it just wasn't for me. I realized I wanted to be a host, and I took my legal career, my legal education, and the way I got into hosting and broadcasting is I started appearing on different networks like Fox News, CNN, CBS, HLN as a legal analyst. So I got my name out there, started making appearances, felt more comfortable on camera, doing live hits, live television. I did Crime Watch Daily with Chris Hansen. I did that for a period of time when somebody said to me, have you heard of Dan Abrams' Law and Crime Network? Actually, it was called Law News at the time. And I said I hadn't. He says, yeah, they're trying to start Court TV up again. It's not Court TV, it's like Court TV. I said, okay. Went on there as a guest a couple of times, and I said, hey, listen, are you looking for any anchors? And they said, we are. I auditioned, and I got a role 2 times a week being an anchor for the Law and Crime Network. And when Law and Crime when Law News became the Law and Crime Network, we entered into a partnership with A&E. This was back in 2017. Dan Abrams hired me full-time as the host of the Law and Crime Network. And from there, a lot has transitioned into different, with NewsNation, WOR in the city. I host a show with my dad called Always Fashion, Sirius XM. I did work for News 12 Long Island. So Law and Crime is really what launched the platform for me to be a broadcaster both on television and radio.
Wow, so it's pretty neat, the whole, even the Dan Abrams story, right? The guy that goes to law school, gets a job, figures out right away that he doesn't want to be a lawyer, always knew he wanted to be a journalist. And the timing was interesting for him as well, with OJ going on and those types of things. I want to talk about that a little bit, just kind of this whole angle of our fascination with media, with true crime, with legal issues at all. It's not new in that, Perry Mason was many, many decades ago. I always knew that I wanted to be a lawyer, probably because of politics, but what closed the deal for me was Matlock, man. You know what I mean? He always solved the case right about 8:58 p.m. Right. Man, I'm telling you, this guy, he's got to hurry up. And here it comes, boom. But
funny you should say that. I was in law school when Suits was on,
right, yeah.
I was like, oh my gosh, the practice of law is amazing. I can't wait. This is great. Wasn't like that at all. Little did I find out. But yes, unfortunately, this was an occasion where TV doesn't quite match reality.
Right, yeah.
I will say about Dan, though, Dan is an incredible person to work for, and he is such an amazing entrepreneur. You talk about somebody who started in law school, realized, he didn't want the life of a practicing lawyer. He has gone into media, started a number of different businesses, is on NewsNation, on Sirius XM, has the police show that he has now. And I think what's amazing about Dan is he's a great example of somebody who takes that legal career and translates it into something else. So great model to follow.
I think it's a perfect example of a reminder. You hear it all the time. You don't necessarily have to practice as an attorney. You can do something else. But isn't it interesting how we could go through this legal window into, I like to call it, the whole house of whether it's pop culture, whether it's news, whether it's politics, or whatever it is. So it's pretty neat. And even though I have the all-day practice, which I really enjoy, it's nice that not only did we learn this area of thinking and this way of thinking, but it takes us to a certain place and creates some flexibility. I love the idea of, you talked about court TV and everything, and as we know, all that time ago, OJ in '95 came on every day. I remember watching. Everybody remembers where they were with the chase. I was in law school, third year of law school, when he was found not guilty, and I remember the reaction in the atrium at Northwestern Law about an hour afterward. We have a fascination with news and with media and with legal issues, and of course, court TV that had gone away came back, was rebranded. In the meantime, Law and Crime had come along to fill in that gap. Talk to me about the playing field as it pertains to just this whole legal space where most people aren't lawyers. We've got terrible reputations. Most people don't necessarily want to be lawyers, but we're fascinated with the law and with legal issues and legal cases. Talk about kind of how you see that, because I'm sure not only as a lawyer, but as an anchor and a reporter, it's something that you come across with quite a bit.
So a number of things I could say about that. Number one, and particularly as a contributor on NewsNation, a lot of the stories that I cover, people are interested in the law, how it affects them. So when there's a new law that comes down, or there's a new regulation put forward, or there's a Supreme Court decision, it's important to address how those decisions, how those laws are going to affect everyday people's lives. And I think that's number one, why people are interested in the law and have a grasp of the law to let them know what they can do and they can't do. The second aspect of it is, and politics aside, with all the political legal questions that we have today, the interest in true crime I see is twofold. One, people are fascinated with these stories because they wonder how, imagine if they were the victims. Imagine this happened to somebody that they love. And it's those eerie stories. One of the things that, I think fascinated people with the Brian Kohberger case, you have somebody, it represents the worst case nightmare, a stranger in the dark coming into a house and murdering 4 people who they had no connection to. That's everybody's worst nightmare. There was also the interest of trying to figure out who did this and who committed this heinous crime. But the second aspect of it is you are dealing with these incredibly compelling and disturbing cases that people latch onto. And it's one thing to watch it on a television show, and it's another thing to see it happening in real life. And the idea that, can we find justice for these people who were killed, whose lives were ruined? Can we figure out who did this? Can the police arrest this person? Can prosecutors successfully get a conviction? Can you tell that whole story and bring justice? It's an old adage in the sense that it's always the good guys versus the bad guys. And that's a big part of the true crime community. Figuring out who did this, who to hold responsible, and helping the people whose lives were affected. And so our job as journalists, legal journalists, is to really break down these issues in these cases in a way for people to understand, be honest with them about both sides of the case, relay the facts to them, and allow them to make a decision for themselves about whether or not they agree or disagree with something, but allow them to go on that journey with you. And I think that is probably, in my opinion, one of the main reasons why people are fascinated with true crime.
Give us some sense of some of the most compelling and interesting cases that you've witnessed and reported on over these years.
Okay, well, obviously, as I mentioned, the Brian Kohberger case, massive interest because you had 4 young people, didn't know who did it for 6 weeks. That grabbed the nation's attention. Anytime you have a case like OJ, or let's say Alec Murdaugh, where you have a suspect, and now the question is, did they do it? Not a question of whether or not they did it, was it self-defense, were they insane? But the cases that really grab people's attention are, did they do it? And you have people, water cooler conversation, fighting over the evidence, saying, oh, this shows that he did it. I don't know, doesn't make sense. Those are the kind of cases that really grab people's attention. Having said that, that's the criminal arena. Everything changed for law and crime during the Johnny Depp Amber Heard trial.
No doubt about it.
I can't explain it to you, Joe. So for people who don't know, law and crime, I would say arguably was at the center of this. We were reporting on this. I was in Virginia for, I don't know, 5 weeks reporting from that courtroom. We were leading the coverage on that, in my opinion. And when we showed up there were people like screaming law and crime. There were people coming up to me. It's never happened in my life, coming up to me, taking photos. This was a moment in time, the Johnny Depp and Amber Heard trial. Now, you had two celebrities. You had an ugly, ugly history between them. And again, it was a question of, was Johnny Depp an abuser? Was Amber Heard an abuser? There wasn't a clear-cut answer, and you had these two sides fighting against one another. When I was at that courthouse, majority of the people were Johnny Depp supporters. In that courtroom, majority were Johnny Depp supporters. But there was an Amber Heard contingent, and they fought with each other, not physically, but they fought with each other outside of that courthouse. And this became a case where people were taking sides. Who do you believe? Who do you don't? I've never seen anything like it. OJ was huge. Yes, I get it. But this was like, for a civil case, I've never seen anything quite like that. And that really brought a lot of attention for law and crime. Our coverage of Harvey Weinstein, I was in that courtroom for when that happened. It's these kinds of celebrity cases, the salacious details that I think people really hone in on.
I thought that in the relatively short period of time that I've been doing legal commentary, that was by far Johnny Depp, Amber Heard, the most consumed case I had seen. You know, here we are, law and crime, talking about this civil case, and this civil case is everything, and everybody has an opinion on it. Do you think we took any lessons from that? Are there particular lessons to be learned from the consumption, from what came out of it? And as we know, as lawyers, for all Johnny Depp thought he'd won, weeks later, there was a settlement so that there was no appeal. What did we take from that, if anything?
I think a few things we took from it. Personally, there's a lot of misinformation online. I'll tell you, when that trial was happening, people were taking our clips on law and crime and manipulating them or cutting them or splicing together to fit their narrative. And there was just so much misinformation about a public trial that was happening on social media platforms like TikTok. So that was a little disturbing to see. I would say what we took from it, there is an interest in these kinds of cases. There's an interest in the law. There's an interest in people understanding. I think when it comes to issues of domestic violence or sexual abuse, those are stories that people really hone in on and feel passionately about. And then I think with celebrities, with a case like this, you had somebody like Johnny Depp, who I will tell you, before this trial started, I hadn't really been thinking a lot about. I know his career had taken a nosedive. There were people like me saying, why would he litigate this? Why would he want this to go into a courtroom? Why would he want cameras there? Why would he want all of his dirty laundry exposed? This is going to make him just look so terrible. And what ended up happening over the course of that case, particularly him testifying, is that his public image did a 180. I mean, the public's perception of Johnny Depp, he's having a comeback right now. Big part of that is that trial. So as much as we talk about cancel culture, if people get a bird's eye view of these cases and what the issues are, you can sway public opinion. If you put a camera in that courtroom, you put a camera in a public proceeding, if people hear what the arguments are, I think that's a big point there, that people's perceptions of someone can change.
Right. Yeah, it's huge. I agree with that entirely. Talk a little bit about prime crime. You've got, you do a lot of different things, but prime crime is your baby, right? You know what I mean? Like a show that you executive produce and that you put on that is in the box of this true crime genre. And I think you're on your third season. So tell us about it, how it kind of came about, and why you're excited about it.
Well, first of all, thanks for mentioning it. So we started Prime Crime during the pandemic when there was no live shows. Right. So there was no live trials and we had to figure out content. And me and some of the executives at Law and Crime were like, how about we do a true crime documentary show? And that was it. And I started it with one other producer. And we took some of our old cases and we put together the crux of it. And I guess what makes it unique is we take the most high profile cases and we focus on the archival footage. So the interrogation tapes, the body cam footage, the 911 phone calls, the surveillance footage, and we take that and we tell the story from beginning to end, from when the crime was committed to what the verdict and sentence is, and we give viewers an opportunity to see the story, to see the evidence, to hear both sides, again, give them the opportunity to make the decision for themselves, and renew interest in these cases that matter, that people's lives were affected, lives were lost. And we don't want these stories going to the wayside because they do matter. They are important. They are life lessons. And we get an opportunity to tell these stories. We started doing, all different kinds of cases. Johnny Depp, Amber Heard was one. Alex Jones was one. But we've also focused on the major criminal trials as well. And it started actually as a 30-minute show. We recently have now, we're expanding that to an hour show. It was picked up for syndication for our first season. We moved over to Peacock on NBC. Some of our episodes are on there. You can find all of the episodes on YouTube. And it's been great. I mean, I learned how to become a editor, producer, writer, researcher. I work with a great team. So it's been a really great learning process. And we've been, we welcome all the, we want to thank all the viewers, I should say, and all the listeners who've been helping the show and growing the show. We really appreciate everybody's interest in it.
Yeah.
You talk a lot about, in answer to at least two questions, you always talk about presenting both sides and letting people decide based on this objective presentation of information, but full presentation. Here's this side, here's this side, here's this information, et cetera. And Prime Crime gives people a chance to revisit some of those things and to see some things maybe involved with cases that they already knew about that they didn't see before, right?
And by the way, we also interview some of the players. So we'll interview a defense attorney for the defendant, or we'll also interview the lead investigator. And we want to, as much as we can, we try to get the players in every case. Some are receptive to coming on, some are not. But we definitely, in each episode, no matter how much it looks like a defendant is innocent or a defendant is guilty, we're presenting both sides for people to understand, because this is not going to be a one-sided show. Yeah, there's a conclusion. Yeah, there's justice one way or another, but we definitely want to show both sides.
It's huge because I think it's important to emphasize all of the objective reporting and research and presentation that is yet going on in television. You hear so much about, well, these guys are way left, these guys are way right, or whatever the case may be. Talk about just that priority and that prerogative that you take to not only as a lawyer and as a journalist to make the presentation that you think is popular or that is the proper presentation, but also this part of fulfilling your responsibility in those jobs to make a full presentation. Because it seems like when in my pessimistic moments, I go, my God, not everybody wants to do this. Not everybody is interested in presenting that balance.
Well, people love sides, okay? They love sides. They love taking those on the left and those on the right, going after one of another. I am the legal contributor on NewsNation. And one of the reasons that I love NewsNation is it presents both sides, it's down the middle. And what that means is it doesn't mean I go on every time and I say, I can't make a decision one way or another. No, I'll give you my opinion. But I'll present both sides. And I'm going to be fair about it. And I think everybody does a really great job of doing that, from the reporters to all the lead anchors on their shows. And that's one of the reasons I value being on NewsNation is I don't have talking points. I don't have to go on and say, I'll give you an example, Trump, right? Oh my gosh, lock Trump away, throw away the key, or, oh my goodness, Trump, this is a complete witch hunt. He's only being prosecuted because of by his political opponents. No, those are talking points. Let's talk about what the facts are here. Let's talk about what the law is and what the realistic scenario is. I think people are eager for that. As much as people love both sides, as I said, people love fighting with one another. They love that adversarial nature. At the same time, there is a hunger and there's an appetite for the truth and for people to go middle, down the road and see what the objective evidence is. So I think there's definitely an interest there.
Speaking of Trump, he's got a couple, maybe 3 trials coming up. So far, I'm having trouble keeping track. How important do you think it is? Because everybody's talking about this, the whole idea, should it be televised? As we know, federal cases aren't normally televised. State cases can be. That's why the Law and Crimes and the Court TVs of the world exist and fill that gap. But how important do you think it might be from a societal standpoint to maybe broadcast some of this so that folks can see it as it occurs in real time?
Well, I'm biased because you're talking to a person in media and a legal journalist who would thrive on the idea of a televised Trump trial. But from a public interest point of view, let me put it this way. So the arguments against it are, well, if you televise it, there's a danger to the jury. You're going to have attorneys who are acting for the camera. They're not going to be performing the way that they need to. And it's just going to, it's not going to be a good thing. I say that is a terrible, terrible way to marginalize it, because really the value in televising this trial outweighs any risks. The reason I say that, everybody can make a political talking point when it comes to Trump. But why don't you listen to the evidence carefully? Why don't you, instead of reading a transcript, watch the witnesses, listen to the evidence, see the exhibits, watch it from beginning to end, pretend you are sitting on that jury. Some people, their minds will never be changed, but there are others who might be. And if you have the opportunity to see this trial unfold in real time, which will be the best example of summarizing the evidence for everybody to see and presenting it, why not broadcast it? Now, it's not going to happen. It's not going to happen in the federal cases. Would it happen in the state cases? Highly unlikely. Highly unlikely. Maybe Georgia, if that. I say state cases because I imagine he's going to be charged. He's going to be indicted in Georgia. But I think there's a tremendous value in it for exposing it, public interest, everybody seeing what this case is about. But unfortunately, you are dealing with a very political case, the former president, and federal cases we've never really seen cameras in court.
Are there any frontiers or uncharted territories that you see TV broadcasting, particularly as it pertains to legal issues, going into? Is there some area that obviously we haven't gone here, we haven't done this yet? What do you see around the corner, around the bend? Anything?
Besides AI taking over?
Oh, other than that, that's that minor thing, where we have an AI Jesse Weber. Wait, that's not Jesse,
An AI Jesse Weber never has a bad hair day. It's never even for AI Jesse Weber. No, I think that, and it's interesting, I've thought about that. I did wonder if it would ever be beneficial for there to be weekly or daily, like, legal lessons for people, like go-tos, how to do this, things to look out for. Sometimes there's interest in it, sometimes there's not. There's other ways that could be fulfilled. I just really think at the end of the day, people are interested in stories, crime stories, political stories, and there is always a legal angle to it. And the best that we can do to explain it to people in a way for them to understand and talk about and repeat, that's our job. And that's always going to be our job, because there's one thing I can tell you, the law is very complicated at times, but it is our duty to break it down and explain it to people in the best way possible so that they understand and appreciate what's really at stake.
So with that in mind, let's put yourself in, ice cream shop close by in Manhattan, New York City, or whatever else, and you see, a couple 13, 14-year-old kids, and they say, hey, wait, you're the Jesse Weber guy, or whatever else. And if you had a couple minutes, in this big, huge, large morass that we know as the law, which is super complicated, as you said, what would be the things that you would explain to them as starting points? Here's something you ought to understand about the law right now that you can consume. You know what I mean? You can take this in and get this, and here's how it connects to you. What would you tell them?
Watch a long crime.
Boom!
Look, if you have an interest in it, there's a number of different avenues to learn about it right now. But I actually will say this, and I don't say this lightly, I really do mean this. I think every high school and every college should present at least one course on basic introductory law. When I say that, I mean contract law, tort law, personal injury, property law, constitutional law. I think it's important for people to understand what the rules are, what their rights are. It's invaluable knowledge, and it's going to help people along the way. And once you teach them, everybody I've spoken to says, wow, that's so interesting. The law is very interesting. Now, whether or not you want to practice or make a career out of it, that's a whole separate issue. You have to be a specific personality type. You have to love researching. You have to love writing. It's an incredible time commitment. You have to do legal analysis. You have to have an analytical mind. It's not for everybody. I just think it's important for everybody to learn a little bit about the law, no matter what they end up doing in business, entertainment, whatever it may be. I think it's an important skill to have.
Well, this has been fantastic. So give us some homework. You've got folks watching there. Man, this Jesse, first of all, they might say, you know what, I've seen him. You know what I mean? That might be thing one, or have heard him. They close their eyes and I recognize that voice. Tell us about the things that you have coming on the horizon and ways people can follow and check on you.
Sure. I hope they don't get bored with this. I have like 7 jobs, and I don't mean that to, like, literally. I don't mean that to, like, bolster myself. I'm just saying it's like a serious life. So for Law and Crime, you can watch me on the network. I sometimes host 9 to 12 in the morning if we have big trials. I'm the co-host of the Sidebar podcast, where we literally every day, it's daily legal news and breakdowns. So Sidebar podcast with my co-host, Anjanette Levy. As you mentioned, I'm the executive producer and host of Prime Crime. So Sidebar and Prime Crime you can find on YouTube. Sidebar is also available on the podcast network. And I'm also the co-host of Law and Crime Daily, which is our syndicated show on the Law and Crime Network. Airs live 5 to 5:30 every day. NewsNation, I'm their legal contributor and fill-in anchor. So I filled in for Dan Abrams. I fill in for Ashley Banfield. And so I'm on NewsNation every week, multiple times a week, sometimes multiple times a day. I'm also the co-host of Always in Fashion on 710 WOR. It's part of iHeartMedia. I co-host that show with my dad, Mark Weber. We talk fashion, business, life, little law, little politics here and there. It's a fun show. And then on Sirius XM, I'm a host. I fill in for Dan Abrams, Laura Coates. I've done special coverage of them for myself whenever there's, the 2024, when it was the midterm election, when it was the presidential election, when Roe v. Wade happened. I was their main anchor on the POTUS channel, channel 124, and I've covered different shows for them there on Sirius XM. And then on WOR also, I'll go back to that. I fill in sometimes for Len Berman, Michael Riedel, and Mark Simone. So I've done some fill-in work there as well. So I have a bunch of different things that I do, and hopefully people see it, and more importantly, people enjoy it.
Man, we can't find you at all, can we?
I just want people to be sick of me. That's what it is. They might be after this interview. I don't need to watch them. I've seen some.
Well, I tell you, I really appreciate you getting on with us. Thanks again, Jesse, for everything that you do. Thanks for taking the time. And we'll be excited. Now I got to go back and watch Prime Crime. I meant to, and it's there. To my mind, I always feel like I got to binge watch. So I need this big, huge block of time. Maybe I just need to go an episode at a time, Jesse. Maybe that's what looks like life.
Let me know. Watch it. Let me know if you like it.
Yeah, for sure. I absolutely would check it out. Well, Jesse Weber on the Joespeak podcast. Thank you, my friend.
Joe, great seeing you. Thanks so much for having me.